Hello, everyone. Last session on documentary was hard to watch, taking some time to process it. I hope you all are feeling better. Taking the session further, I'm very thrilled to share India for Animals platform with you all and happy to assist you all as moderator for this session. We have Shweta Sood with us, who will take us through ways of movement building and alliance for animals. The best example for this subject is right here, right now, India for Animals Camp Conference, which wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for building a movement and multiple coalitions for animals. So let us understand and know more about this vital area from the expert. I now take the pleasure in introducing the speaker to you all. Shweta Sood holds a postgraduate degree in English literature from the University of Delhi and has nearly a decade of experience in networking, campaign management, marketing, and content creation. Formerly working as the Deputy Programs Director at the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organization, she led diverse teams across range of programs and communications and built many initiatives in advocacy and research, establishing social grassroots networks across 60 cities in India. Currently, she leads the programs department at 50 by 40, working across verticals of climate change, southern leadership, and partnership and strategy. Welcome, Shweta Sood. Before we go ahead, if you all have any questions, you can drop it in the box, which is called Ask a Question, which is left side of your screen. And without any delay, let's hear Shweta Sood. Over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Meghna, for that really warm welcome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of India for Animals. I hope you've all really enjoyed the session so far and find this one interesting too. My name is Shweta Sood, and I'm the head of programs at 50 by 40, which is a global collective impact organization that aims to cut the production and consumption of animal products by 50% by the year 2040. Today, we're here to talk about building movements at both the local and national level, and also briefly touch upon building coalitions. So let's get started and go to the next slide. So what is grassroots mobilization and why is it important? So essentially, grassroots mobilization is the process of building a micro community. It's a small community that is motivated, aware, and skilled at using different tools. So what does motivated, aware, and skilled really mean? So motivated basically means that they're driven by the cause that they're working for, that they're innately passionate about the work that they do, whether it is rescuing dogs or spreading awareness towards dietary shifts. Aware means that they're somewhat aware of the issues within their sector, although it is important to know that new knowledge can always be acquired. And thirdly, it's a skilled community. So they do bring some skills to the table, whether it is in terms of knowing how to provide first aid to puppies or how to conduct good outreach or how to organize events. When these three set of skills, being motivated, aware, and skilled, are used to change any certain status quo, whether it is gender rights or human rights, or in our case, animal welfare and animal rights, that is when movements are born. So essentially, grassroots mobilization means empowering people and building a movement from the ground up. Next slide. So why is grassroots mobilization important? And this is an important question because we do have a lot of national and international organizations that are doing exemplary work in our field. So then why do we kind of want to build grassroots and local communities? The reason for that is that good grassroots mobilization can result in exponential impact. Once people are mobilized, they do create volunteers. Volunteers in turn create more volunteers, and that creates a multiplier effect. They can communicate in a style that is in line with their community, and that can lead to an exponential impact in the long run. Again, because this is a community that kind of keeps creating volunteers, there is sustainability that is built into the model itself, kind of like the difference between feeding a person food one day versus teaching a person to farm, just increases the sustainability of that movement. And it also leads to long-term change. So continuous efforts at creating strong movements that last lead to long-term changes because these movements exist for a long time. As you can see from the graph right there, these small term changes lead to like a big massive change in the long run, even though you kind of don't see them because they're really small changes to begin with. But most importantly, grassroots mobilization leads to like locally responsive communities because no national or international organization can look into the unique problems that exist across every single region of a country as diverse as India. Locally responsive communities therefore come together to solve these unique issues. So an example of this might be, for example, maybe there aren't enough hospitals in your community for animals, or there might be no strong sterilization program. So it is the local community that will kind of get together to fight for these issues. Next slide. So how is it that we can get into building a movement? So there are some basic steps that we can undertake to strengthen communities and build grassroots movements. And there is a reason that the first one is in green, which is facilitators and mobilizers. So let's just jump right in. Next slide. So at the very heart of movement building are good mobilizers. Everything else, all the other things mentioned in that list, whether it is materials or grants or tours, they're all tools that a good mobilizer uses to build a movement. This is really important because if there is one place where we must invest, it is in finding, engaging, building, and training good mobilizers. So how do you identify a good mobilizer? What does a good mobilizer look like? And this can be slightly hard to identify because it's not a usual set of skills that you can look for. Instead, we're really looking for somebody who can embody a certain personality. And there are certain people who are just innately good at being mobilizers, and they do possess some of these skills. Although it is important to know that all of these things can be honed, but this is kind of what we're looking for when we look for good mobilizers. The first one is fairly obvious. They're committed and passionate, which means that they have a drive and they're interested in what they do and say, because there is no substitute for true passion, and that is what kind of keeps you going. They're moved, and they are moved by a belief in the work that they undertake. Again, I think this point was made before, but we don't want to confuse knowledge with passion. Knowledge can always be acquired. So we need commitment, passionate people. We also need people who are empathetic and relatable. So, I think we all have that friend who's relatable, warm, caring, is able to look people in the eye, can strike up a conversation with anybody. So people just find them relatable and warm. They are humble yet charismatic. And I think that's a slight oxymoron because people who are charismatic are rarely humble. But as an example, they're the kind of people who just draw the people towards them, and they're everyone's friend. They do not want to steal the limelight or steal the moment, but they're always there to help. They don't necessarily need the credit or the spotlight, which doesn't mean that they shouldn't get it, but that is not what motivates them. They're intrinsically good listeners, so people have a sense of feeling heard with certain people. And there are people who strangers can talk to fairly easily, or there are people who kind of lend a sense of trust very quickly. So people who are good listeners are able to bring this to the conversation, and they need for good mobilizers. They have to be resilient because, as anyone who has tried building local communities, mobilizing people is a hard job. So we need people who have the capacity to hear the no, to be able to kind of live with it, and then have the patience to maybe over time turn that no into a yes. The sixth one is sort of new, which is comfort with data and technology. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be super tech savvy. But I think the basic need to understand that we do have to maintain some data and then use that data well. So who are the activists in your city who come up every time? Who's good at doing particular outreach? Who's good at camera work? Who's good at organizing people? Who's good at calling everyone else and making sure that they come? I think this kind of information is important to store. So we don't need people who are just backed by pure passion, but also have a sense of being able to kind of work with data at the most fundamental level. And lastly, good mobilizers are always from within the community. So there may be people who have been working in this particular field for a while, are going over and beyond what they do. And it's also important to kind of take people from within the community, because if you are trying to mobilize people who speak a certain language, then it is good if your mobilizers also speak that language. Or if you're trying to maybe mobilize a group of seniors, then it is good to have mobilizers who are also seniors. So try and find engagers and leaders from within the community to be good mobilizers. Just as a quick point, this isn't a specific skill set, but this is a personality which can be honed. And as long as one is innately curious and passionate about this work, we can kind of get here. But again, coming back to the previous slide, this does kind of need time. And organizations and individuals and even local groups should kind of spend time towards building mobilization and mobilization skill sets. Over to the next slide. So what do good mobilizers do, and why are they so central to building movements? So essentially, they're the chief nose that recruit activists, build connections, and kickstart advocacy. And advocacy can mean different things to different people. So let's go over to the next slide. So now the thing that we're talking about here is a small tangent and doesn't exactly go with what we're talking about today, but it is important to know the basic ways through which volunteers can be recruited, because that is the chief function of mobilizers. We're quickly going to go through two different scenarios that can exist. And one is where a city where volunteers do exist, but they're not engaged. And the second one will be where volunteers do not exist to begin with. So most big cities do have volunteers, whether we're aware of them or not. They may be active or dormant, but at the very least, we know they're interested in our cause. So a simple practical guide to get volunteers is to just kind of make a list of existing contacts in that city, check out existing NGOs, Facebook pages, the go-to people in that city, different WhatsApp groups, and make your list, and then start having one-on-one conversations with these people. These one-on-one conversations are the core of what mobilization really is. They help build a map of what a city looks like. These conversations have to be you hearing people out. Effective listening is really important over here, as then we'll be able to understand what this micro community really wants to do in that particular city. The closest example that I can think of here is that this is somewhat like a first date, where you want to present your best side, you want to be curious about what the other person is saying, you want to be able to listen, and that kind of helps you create a map of what that city looks like. Honestly, this alone would need a whole presentation to talk about, but it is really important to build one-on-one conversations and have these connections. Let's go over to the next slide. If you do have no contacts in a city, then the obvious thing to do is check places of interest, such as colleges, senior secondary schools, other animal NGOs, or even non-animal NGOs, such as Rotaract, Blue Cross, etc. And I think the important thing here is to always keep presentation ready that highlights the key aspects of what is it that you want to work on and kind of gets people to come on board. Going back to, again, the micro community, we need a skilled presenter. It is really important to hone in your presentation, spend time making it, spend time practicing it, because this is where you will get your first core volunteers from. So after you're done with your presentation, take down a list of interested people. And then again, we go back to the point of building a connection, having one-on-one conversations and hearing more about what they're kind of passionate about. Next slide. So that was the slight tangent, but I do think it's important to know how to kind of recruit people. Let's get back to our list of 7. Next slide. So the next thing and the first tool in any mobilizer's belt is essentially resources. Resources could be leaflets, video outreach kits, or in our pandemic-induced world, digital presentations. It is important to ensure that there is some variety of information that we do keep on sharing, because individuals who are doing outreach as well as the ones receiving the message kind of get bored of similar materials. If you're in a big, diverse kind of place, make sure that your content is available across languages, and you're using material that is smart, eye-catching, and is hopefully trial tested. Next slide. Along with good leaflets and good resources, we also need good information guides. There is little control over what volunteers do in a city, so make sure that you use your guides to kind of lead and kind of do different workshops and have conversations so that people don't pick up the wrong way of doing outreach. It is okay to have room for flexibility. Different people would want to preach different messages, but make sure that the bottom line of effective outreach is not tampered with. Next slide. Skill and leadership development. So the job of a mobilizer becomes easy when there is development of leadership in a city. When leaders grow, mobilizers can either focus on different areas within the city or different cities altogether. Skill and leadership development is also a great way to kind of activate some dormant volunteers. People are always enthusiastic about skill sharing opportunities, and following skill sharing by a practical example of outreach is a good way to kind of get people activated. Next slide. And if you could click on that twice, I think you might see the other image as well. So I think providing a sense of identity to a group, asking them to come up with their own name, providing them help, getting them new matching t-shirts, starting a social media page, starting a social media community can go a long way in building strong ownership within a community. And this recognition kind of really pushes them through to the next level. Next slide. Again, providing small grants can be an effective way to kind of push local events such as local workshops, potlucks, activities such as wall painting, or even larger events such as like movie screenings and vegan fests. For larger organizations, I think funding small grants is a very smart investment. We're looking to build grassroots movements. For smaller grassroots groups, please do look up to national organizations, ask them for small grants, tell them to start small grant programs. I think it makes for an interesting exchange at both levels. Next slide. And this is the last point, which is like national days of action or national campaigns. And I think in the initial stages of a movement, it can be very successful to build around days of action that are different from regular ways of doing outreach. Examples of this can include demonstrations or different innovative campaigns. So there's, as you can see, there's a presentation on fast against slaughter. And there's this campaign, which I don't know if anyone remembers now, but it was called Erase the Divide, where we basically created a cutout and then we took photos and posted them on Instagram and Facebook. These innovative ways kind of gather the attention of different activists. They also gather the attention of a broad audience. They're intrinsically motivated. The only thing is that they do need to be planned well in advance. And if they're done across the country, like in different cities, then it really creates like a wave of outreach and a wave of action that nothing else kind of compares to. And since we're kind of running short on time, I'm just going to quickly share the slide on recap. So I think these 7 things done well, done together with a focus on facilitation and mobilization is what leads to strong grassroots networks. Next slide. Maybe we can quickly jump into what coalition building is like. So we've discussed grassroots building so far, which is basically kind of collecting our own community, people who are interested in animal welfare, who are interested in animal rights. However, in our current times, the discourse on food systems is becoming so broad and diverse that we would be remiss in not talking about alliance and coalition building. Next slide. So what really is coalition building? When organizations partner with each other in a way such that their strengths complement one another, that is what results in coalition building. Coalition building is different from movement building. For example, a healthcare nonprofit would want to collaborate with organizations that have expertise on, say, mental health care, NGOs working on hunger and nutrition, or bodies such as the World Health Organization. When this healthcare nonprofit comes together on collaborating with all of these different organizations on a certain campaign, that results in strong coalition building. Next slide. And as is the case with 50 by 40, as well as maybe hopefully many of you present here, we do understand that diet change is a complex issue that does affect a multitude of social justice issues, such as climate change, world health, animal rights and welfare, land use, faith. And I think when organizations from these different spheres come together to solve the food crisis is when we truly have like a strong coalition. So for example, when Greenpeace, a Physicians Association for Nutrition, or FIAPO as an animal rights organization, or World Resources Institute, or Green Faith, I think when all of these organizations kind of come together to solve the issue of food systems, that is when we will have like a truly strong, powerful representative movement that can solve the food systems issues. That is also what I currently do at 50 by 40. So if you'd like to know more about that, please do reach out to me. I hope that was an interesting introduction into what coalition building is. I would now like to wrap up and just say thank you so much for having me. If you'd like to reach me, then my details are available on the next slide. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Shweta, for helping us understand how important movement building and coalition building is for social justice movement like animal rights. Also keeping it very simple and easy. In fact, I'd say sharing some secret recipes in understanding volunteer recruitment, mobilization, capacity building, which is usually considered a bit challenging. So thank you so much. We will now keep the space open for question and answers, and I'll take questions one by one. So just connecting to just that we ended with coalition building in the end of the presentation. Shweta, how and what we can learn from other organizations that work for animals, and also national as well as international level.
Right. So, hi, Meghna. First of all, thank you for having me here. I think this is a wonderful forum to discuss everything to do with animal rights within India. And I think I think it is important because this movement is growing. I think as far as like what can we learn from other organizations is concerned, I think every organization has a particular expertise. And I think, for example, in India, FIAPO, in fact, across the world over, I think India has a really successful model for movement building and for working with people. I think I can say that more surely now, having worked both in India and like at a global level. So I think there are certainly things to learn from other animal rights organizations. Um, I think what I would say is maybe we need to kind of move outside the animal rights organizations purview and really explore how can we learn from organizations that have had a larger history of success, a longer history of success. So, for example, how has the energy revolution happened, right? How have we moved from, say, coal to solar? There is clearly a success story there. So how can we learn from those organizations? I think learn those lessons and build allies in them. I think that we maybe need to do more of and do better of. We already, I think today are at a level where there is some degree of cohesion between national and international organizations. There are different lists, which I hope, like, I'm going to give a shout out to the FAST community here, which is the Farm Animal Strategic Team, which is a global community of just animal-based organizations that do share their strategies, what worked, what didn't work. So I think it is important, especially for national organizations, to put time, energy, effort into these coalitions and communities, but also to look outside the purview of purely animal rights organizations and kind of expand the horizon a little bit. I think that's where the next step lies.
Right. We have another question in connection to coalition building. That is, should we use the collective impact approach for coalition building?
There are a lot of different approaches to use when we talk about coalition building, and it depends on what you want essentially out of a coalition. And I think if you're talking about systems level change, if you're talking about changing, so if you're talking about changing the entire food system, right, then the collective impact model works really well, because if you think about food systems, you realize that they are inherently complex, right? So food systems affect hunger, nutrition, health, economics, mental health, climate change, faith even, right? So I think so when you talk about food is inherently complex. So a collective impact model where there is an interlinkage between food and faith and food and climate and food and energy, it makes sense for the larger system. If you're talking about say, how can you build a movement within a city, then maybe the collective impact model is not the strongest. Then maybe having like a more limited but direct focus, especially in the early days, and ensuring that there is some actionability, I think that helps. And then you maybe build up to a collective impact model. I hope that somewhat helps. Yeah.
Yes, Shweta. Connecting to that, now that we spoke, movement building in cities, another area is rural areas, which is very much applicable in India. How do we work on building movement in rural areas?
Right. Again, I think whenever we talk about building a movement, we have to first, two questions that we have to answer is why do we need to? So why do we want to build a movement in rural India? Is it because we want to ensure that the dogs over there have first aid, or do we want to build a movement because we want to convince people of like vegetarianism, veganism? Like, what is the idea behind building a movement? I think that is what is important. I do think if you talk about rural India, almost, I think there is just so many self-help groups that work there. There are government, like colleges, government schools, etc. So I think those would be good places to start. I think working with larger organizations who already have like a very strong foothold in rural India. So if you look at organizations again who work on food, like I don't mean like animal rights, but I mean who work with farmers in some sense, or people who work on energy and climate, or even people who work on HIV. I think they already have really strong roots into like what the landscape of India, rural India looks like. So maybe tying up with those and then kind of getting into movement building. And I think ensuring that you allocate resources, because if you want to do movement building in rural India, you should have like at least, I would say, maybe 2-3 coordinators who are doing that at scale, So I think those would be places to start.
Yes. Another question is, how do we engage the dynamics of community groups which have people from different background and beliefs?
Mhm. Right. So I think again, like if you look at like who's a skilled mobilizer, who's a skilled movement builder, it is someone who can kind of almost merge these beliefs, right? Who makes room for hearing. And I think this brings me to another point, which is that training on conflict resolution, training on building movements, training on hearing people out is something that mobilizers should have because it is critical to building movements. And we I mean FIAPO did do that in the past. Um, so I think it is important to kind of ensure that there is some degree of that there is some degree of how do I say this? So that there is a particular direction that a local group is taking. So for example, we might say um, in Indore, there is no government hospital, or there is the government hospital building that is condemned. And whether someone is working for education or someone is working on animal birth control, everyone feels there should be a hospital, right? So you could have these different beliefs and still kind of work towards one particular thing that will kind of build everyone together. And I think we pick up more of those projects initially, build some trust and faith in the community, and maybe then go over to like things that might cause conflict. So there are always things that people can agree on. I think there's this like, so you might not agree on everything, but is there a bare minimum that we can agree on? And then we kind of start from there. So yeah.
Yes, and we did have few sessions on this as well in IFA
Right.
previously. And Shweta, if you have to say, how is the movement right now? We have just 2 3 minutes.
Right.
How is the movement for animals has grown from past to now, and how we need to improve? If you can show some light on that.
Right. Yeah, I think the movement is really blossoming. I think we see vibrant communities. I do see communities coming up like at tier 2, tier 3 cities as well. I don't know if there's a stronger kind of national movement, which I think there was like about 3 years ago, but I do think there are far more stronger local movements that are coming up, which is how movements grow. So I think that also makes sense. I think I would kind of say two things. I think at the more local level, I think it would be great if groups kind of start focusing more on policy, because I think a lot of the work that we do is kind of focused on two things, either on outreach, which is public and consumer facing, or shelters, which is kind of limited to say 4% of the animals that exist in India. I think if we can start doing local policy reform, I think that would be really powerful. So can we change the laws, or even can we do like small degree of like corporate outreach? Can we get our local bakeries to keep soy milk, local cafes to keep soy milk? Can we get them to kind of go egg free? I think those kind of changes will start showing effect if we can use local chapters to do that. And I think if we speak at the level of like organizations like FIAPO, NHSI, and others like that, I think, and I kind of alluded to this earlier in my Q&A, which is that I think we need to learn from movements that have been successful, and we need to really tap into existing movements that speak so strongly to us. So one example is, for example, we all quote this figure all the time that 14.5% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from livestock, and those are the most conservative figures that we use, right? We don't usually also say that at least $536 billion a year is spent on climate change. But not even 1% of that is going into animal rights, even though it's causing at least 14.5% of the problem. So can we imagine what the movement would look like if 14% of 536 billion actually came to this movement, right? And I'm just talking about climate change here. There are so many other intersections and movements that exist, right? So I think maybe just going a step higher now and finding those intersections, I think would be an amazing next step to take.
Yes. Just checking for the questions. And one last important question: how to kind of build association with international organizations?
How do we build again,
Yes.
like, right? So I think one thing is, can there be conscious time, energy, and effort from within the staff of national organizations to do that, right? So for example, Meghna, is a percentage of your time allocated to actually finding out what are international organizations doing? Where is there room? Because I think we all know how overwhelmed we do get when we're working day to day, right? There are like 20,000 things to do and everything is like urgent and important. So can we actually carve out time to do that? Because if you begin looking, there are just so many coalitions, and like 50 by 40 is a coalition, right? And like it sits at the intersection of like at least 10 different ideas. The Farm Animal Strategic Team is another one. Asia for Animals is another one. Aquatic Life Institute, Aquatic Animals Asia. So there are just so many Animals Asia. There are just so many alliances that do exist already. Faith-based, like Green Faith is one that is kind of in a global forest coalition. So there are so many coalitions that exist, but I think we kind of tend to not see them because we're a little siloed in the focus of the work that we do. So can we start giving it time? Because I think as soon as we start looking out, we'll see actually, it's the only example that I can give is, how you go to like an ice cream shop and you've been eating chocolate ice cream all the time. And as soon as you stop eating chocolate ice cream, you realize that there's strawberry, there's kiwi, there's, pineapple, but you have to take that step out. And then you see that there's actually a lot there. It's not even really hard to figure out. So I think putting in that time and taking that step, especially at the national level for organizations, would be a strong step.
Yes, certainly, Shweta. Thank you so much. With that, we are up with the time and we can wind up the session. I thank so much for your insights and to everyone who involved in this session. I hope you all have a learning experience with the rest of the session. Thank you so much.